All right, we're gonna get started because I know the time constraints that we have. I want to start by introducing myself. I'm Denny Doyle. I'm the chairman of the Good Practice Committee, which this is where this all started. Mr. Cook was instrumental in making me chairman of the Good Management Committee. So in retaliation of that, I made him the chair of what we are here today on the mechanical harvesting, and this is why we're here today. The idea of this was to merge new technology with our industry that's approximately 101 years old. We have gone through our first 70 years, there were very little changes within our industry. But the last 30 has been just tremendous. So this is the foundation of why we're here today, to see what other industries are doing and to see where we're going to go. Mr. Cook and I have been friends for over 39 years, and that's really hard to believe. We've been doing this a long time. Rod comes to us with a vast amount of skills. He started in his young career in Michigan, basically as a researcher. He served there for several years, and his love of sailing made him go to the West Coast. Most of the Michigan growers believe that he went there for the blueberry industry. It's not true. As you know, sailing in Michigan is only restricted to about 2 days a year, where on the West Coast he could sail for a long time. We really owe Rod a great applause here for putting this together. This is a very difficult situation to do. I mean, we're all here gathering all this information, but you know, I think we owe Rod and Mark Vlada's staff for getting us all together on our very first technology symposium. It's our hope that this will continue and grow through the next years. It's vital important to us. I could say a lot about Mr. Cook, but I think, well, some of the things I could say, some of the things no. We've been dear friends, and I know he really put his heart and soul in putting this event together. It kind of looks like it's organized right now, but believe me, there were many calls Rod and I had, you know, getting this together. And so at this time, I'd like to bring up Mr. Cook, your chair, and the person really responsible for having us all here today. So nice round of applause for Mr. Cook.
Thanks. Actually, I think Mary and her team are the ones to thank, but nevertheless, I will, if it goes well, I'll take all the credit, certainly. So I did want to do an introduction in the afternoon session because it is quite a bit different than what we did this morning. This morning's section, as you all know, was pretty much on what we have available to us today in terms of technology for harvesting our crops, sorting our crops. But you know, as we go forward, there's a lot of things out there that I think we as an industry need to be aware of. It gets pretty exciting. There's a lot of things going on. I don't know whether it's the low rate of interest or what it is, but generally this changing world of ag technology has really generated a lot of enthusiasm among investor groups. I just put a few of the little high points here. Investments in ag tech in 2016 exceeded $25 billion. Now, granted, a lot of that was in biotech, so we're talking genetics, breeding programs, things like that, but tons of money. And now as we move into 2017, we are seeing a significant shift in where a lot of this technology is going. put 3 different companies down here that just had transactions in excess of $300 million. Granular Technology is a software company, just acquired by DuPont Dow, 300 and some million dollars. Blue River Technology, a small tractor company that paints their stuff green and yellow, just purchased them for over $300 million. It's a robotics company. And then you've got Farmers Business Network. Now, it's hard to describe. I think the best thing I can talk about with those guys is it's more or less like an online cooperative serving growers across the country in trying to find cheaper ways to buy your supplies, fertilizers, and so on and so forth. But they also have ties into the investment community where they're talking about ways to put advances on crops. So the time from when you ship your product to the time you actually receive the money from your marketer can be cut down dramatically. It's not up and running yet, as I understand, but a lot of stuff going on, again, as opposed to the biotech stuff. So it's a marked change in where a lot of investment dollars are being spent. Then we have other tech highlights. I get about 3 or 4 emails almost every day now from these high-tech firms. Graphene-based sensor, I'll show you an example of that. It's weird stuff. GPS-based soil sampling. This is along the lines of these precision agriculture, more along the lines of what the row crop people are doing, but it's finding its way into our small fruit, our specialty crops. And of course, you will hear actually today from people in the robotics, autonomous machinery, spraying, and so on and so forth. And we felt it was important to bring some of these people to you, give you a sense of what's going on, not in the blueberry industry for the most part, but in other parts of agriculture, because it's important that we understand what is happening in technology out there. Are there ways that we can bring that back to the farm? So this started, as some of you know, I have a son who works for Facebook. Facebook owns a little company called Oculus, and they're into virtual reality. Now, if you haven't ever done virtual reality, you put the little headset on like this. And when you put it on, you can put on these gloves that have a tactile response. So when you look up and you see an apple tree, you can reach out with your hand and you feel yourself picking an apple. Weird stuff, huh? Well, he works with this group in Facebook, and he put this headset on me, and other than looking ridiculous, you look up the sky, your feet are down below, you reach your hands out, and I had just come from a technology symposium trying to work on harvesting aids, and I whipped these things off, and wow, you know what you could do? You could have little robots in your field with television cameras looking at the bushes, and you could have people in a lazy boy chair in an air-conditioned room anywhere in the world reaching out and picking your berries. I thought that was just, what a super revelation. And he looked at me, and like all good sons, he didn't call me an idiot. Didn't use those words. He just kind of went, well, Dad, first off, it ain't rocket science. In fact, it's barely robotic science. You do realize people are operating, doctors are operating in Boston on people in Europe using ocular scopes and all kinds of stuff and cutting on people thousands of miles away. All the technology you talked about exists today. It's just how much time and money. So I ask you, is this our harvesting crew of the future? I don't know. How are they using it now? Well, you know, number one use of virtual reality, or I have ER, that's enhanced reality, which he actually told me was what I was talking about. It's not virtual reality. Had to explain it to poor old Dad. Anyway, number one use is in gaming. But when you think about it, most Microsoft computers and a lot of other things come with a solitary game, or the old, dating myself here, used to have the old Pong games. Why? Because it got you used to using the computer and using your hands and maneuvering things around with that computer. It's just simply training the human mind to use this machine. So the fact that it's being used in gaming is actually just a training mechanism, both for people as well as for the programmers. We do have people in the Silicon Valley now that are using these things they put it on their new employees, their onboarding program, nice big corporate term, to train them in all kinds of things. There are companies, much as I was shocked to find out, that actually didn't just blabber their mouth about things like this, but are actually working on great pruning technology, utilizing headsets and using robots that operate in the field. So this isn't a million years out. These things are possible, and there are people working on systems like this right now. Drones, I know it looks like the invasion from Mars, right? But drones, I own drones. Anybody else own drones in the room? Yeah, hey, all right, we should get together. It's, I can offer you two pieces of advice for drones. Number one, they do not like landing in swimming pools. Don't operate well after that. And number two, if you have big blackberry bushes in your yard, you should probably be wary of landing it too far into the bush, because I gave up a lot of blood and about 3 hours of time hacking into my blackberries to recover my drone. But we could put a whole seminar on about drones. Now, we will hear some about drones this afternoon, but we chose not to do that because these are almost becoming commonplace. Most of them not these things. These are actually quadcopters for those that are really precise. But are these our next fieldmen? Because you will hear about people who are using these to evaluate plant or field watering needs, nutritional needs, pruning needs, crop aging, how is your crop maturing, crop load, all kinds of things that are currently being evaluated through the use of drones. I talked about the graphene sensor. This is what this is. I don't know if this, see this? It's a corn leaf. This is not insect eggs, which is what I thought it was to begin with. This is a graphene sensor that was 3D printed, just a couple molecules thick, and by varying the molecular structure on the sensor through your printer, it can react with the cell wall structure in the corn leaf, and they can determine whether that crop is hurting for water, whether it's looking for additional nitrogen, and so on. They're doing this out of Iowa State University. It's just a brand new thing they just released. But is this the way we're going to monitor down at the plant level? People talk a lot about precision agriculture. You can get so precise that you can look at individual plant needs. So, sensors, we will have a discussion about sensors, and it's pretty incredible the kind of things that we do. Now, obviously what I've put up here doesn't talk much about harvest and such, but we are continuing to look at these, and the shift this afternoon is more towards, are there technologies that we can utilize to become more efficient at the farms? Because it's not just labor, it's not just harvest labor, certainly critical needs for us. But we need to expand our interest and look at a lot of these things. Let's see, okay. However, we talked about harvesting. I got a really old beat up BEI machine here because I wanted to remember where we came from. You know, our industry is really, really lucky on a couple points. First one is, we at least can harvest our crops with machines. Oh, what the strawberry people would love to have that for. The raspberry, blackberry people for fresh. We're the only ones who even have a shot. But the other thing, and the reason I wanted to put this slide in, is because if you paid careful attention to this morning's program, you heard a lot of technology that was developed at the farm first. The welding rod, the bone pile outside behind the barn is really where a lot of the technology that got us where we are today came from. And the challenge we have going forward is most of us can function on a computer, but most of us are not electronical engineers. Most of us do not know really what a sensor hardly kind of sort of is, let alone would we know how to employ it or fly it in a drone, thus my landing in a swimming pool. So So I want us to, what this meeting really became about. First, we started off thinking, okay, well, we got to help bring the message to the growers, educate the growers and such. But about halfway through, I realized, no, it's as important that we as growers educate some of the presenters that will be here, especially this afternoon, people who are not currently necessarily engaged in the blueberry industry. But it's critical as growers that we provide them with input. You can have the fanciest sensor in the world, but if they do not know how to deploy it effectively for us, it does us no good as an industry. So I wanted to really sort of end with this, the on-farm inventions. I was privileged to meet the Burdick brothers that made the rod destemmer. I was at the Grand Champ farm when they did the first pull along. I still remember you guys kind of unveiling that in the yard. A lot of this stuff is very cool stuff, and I'm glad to be a part of it. And I challenge us all, both presenters as well as growers, to have this interaction because it really requires a blending of the two, a marriage of the two, to be effective for both parties. So with that, as to why we're sort of doing this, a brief introduction of what we're going to hear this afternoon. First, if we don't have a roadmap, it's hard to know where you're going, but it's also easy to get lost. And so what we will start the afternoon presentation with is a presentation from Dean McCorkle. Dean's working with the grape industry, who is asking many of these same questions. Where do we cut labor? How do we cut labor? How do we employ robotics effectively? And so he'll explain what they're doing, but the grape industry, both wine and table grape, have really begun to look economically at all of the little labor activities within a vineyard and trying to codify those, evaluate those to determine economically what makes the most sense for them in the area of robotics. We're then going to move on to a panel, and we've got some people that are working with these autonomous activities, sprayers. It's just crazy stuff. It's amazing. We have a person that's going to talk about weeding, those kind of things. We will have then this sensor panel, and it's sort of all about the data. It's a big deal right now, who collects the data, who manages the data, and a lot of that's all taken in through sensors. So that could be quite interesting as well. And then the last panel of the day is really sort of, I call it financing the future. When this committee started out, there was an assumption by a lot of people that our purpose was to collect the best ideas and we would fund advancements in machinery itself. And there was a rather vocal opposition that said, wait a second. There's a lot of variation across the country. What works in Jersey ain't gonna work in Oregon, ain't gonna work in Florida, so on and so forth. Using cooperative dollars, I'll use that term, doesn't really make sense because there's not a single solution to these things. So we've got to find better ways to utilize our money to make this effective. One of them was the development of the bird sensor, and out of that research came a multi-million-dollar USDA grant that we didn't have to actually contribute anything for. So we've been successful in doing a few things. Is that enough? I'm not sure that it really is, because as we will have some of the economists talk to us, we're going to find out that the margins available for most of these machinery guys you heard this morning, it's not enough to fund the kind of research that they probably need to be highly successful or to make those aha moments in breakthroughs. So we do have a couple people from the strawberry industry where major competitors have come together in a variety of different manners to fund this type of technology as an industry. Hey, I'm right on time. Okay, so that's the afternoon lineup. I hope you will be entertained, enjoy it, and think very deeply about it, ask really hard questions about it. We've had fun putting this thing together, the committee and I, and we hope that you will enjoy it. So I'd like to begin by introducing Dr. McCorkle. He is program specialist for Texas A&M and the extension service there. He works in the area of economics for the state of Texas. In other words, how agricultural activities benefit the state, but he also has this large grant in working with the grape industry in the United States, looking at feasibility of developing robotic technology for the wine and grape industry. So with that, Dr. McCorkle.
Okay, to the right. All right, if I'm going to talk about technology, I guess I've got to master this, which I'm sure a first grader could master in no time, and first time I do it, there we go. Yeah, when Rod and I first started talking about me possibly coming and talking to you guys today, one thing he specifically told me was not to bore you guys with a bunch of numbers. So with that being said, Rod, would you mind stepping out until I'm done, and then we'll welcome you back in after I'm done. No, I've had a great time. I've enjoyed the conversation with some of you last night and this morning. I've got kind of a crash course on blueberries. Well, let me tell you a little bit about what's going on in wine grapes. Maybe I should say what's going on and what's not going on. But a quick little background on the wine grapes industry. They're grown in about 15 states in the U.S. If we look at all grapes, not just wine grapes, there's a little over 1 million acres across the country. And I would guess about 650,000 of those acres are in wine grapes. It's kind of hard to get a firm number on that. I think some of the NASS crop survey responses, if we could get a little bit better return rate on those, we'd have probably a firmer number on that. I think of the remaining acres, there's probably about 100,000 acres of table grapes, and then the rest of those are going to be raisins and juice. And as you might guess, for the wine grapes side of it, most of those are grown in California. There's a wide variety of production practices and trellis systems that's kind of unique to wine grapes and table grapes. That kind of makes technology a little bit more difficult to develop. And as we all know, the labor supply, and I say labor quality issue, is a challenge. This USDA NEFA grant that I want to talk to you a little bit about, what this map shows and what we did, we worked with growers of wine grape panel growers of 3 to 6 growers in 6 states, or 5 states, excuse me. We had 2 in Texas. We had a wine grape panel in California, one in Oregon, one in Washington, and one in New York. And if I can get this pointer working, we also had 3 raisin grape growers down south of Fresno that we worked a little bit with. And then we had some one grower panel with table grapes that we worked with. And the goal of this was primarily to look at really 2 different things. One, we were interested in where is this industry, or these vineyards in specific, not the whole industry. We're just looking at these vineyard panels that these growers help us put together. Where are they headed over, say, the next 10 years financially, given the status quo, if they keep using the same production practices that they're using now? And basically, there's no new technology developed. So we did that with the essence of time. I'm not going to go over any of that with you. But the other thing we looked at was we tried to look at what's the economic feasibility of robotic technology potentially being developed. It doesn't exist yet, but we were just looking at, we were kind of laying the groundwork for somebody to come in and develop technology for a vineyard. So that's basically what we were doing. We were doing groundwork in advance of something actually being developed. And then I guess the third thing, or kind of a subset of my second point on the feasibility of robotics, is we also partnered with RE Squared, which is a robotics firm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So they're currently working on kind of looking at what's the state of the art, kind of hardware and software wise with robotics. What would be needed to develop some of these things that I'm going to highlight here in a bit, and where might there be some technology gaps where we need some improvements to fill those gaps. Okay, quickly on labor costs with wine grapes. Each column represents one of the states where we had a wine grapes panel. Oops. So Texas, New York, Washington, Oregon, California. The second row there, MH just stands for machine harvest. HH stands for hand harvest. The two hand harvest states, based on the growers we met with, and they helped us build cost of production type budgets for a vineyard that represents the area where they're from. So when we got done, we had three states that were machine harvest: Texas, New York, and Washington. And to kind of further complicate things, New York is a custom machine harvest, so they're hiring a custom crew with a machine to come in and harvest. Texas and Washington own the machine. Oregon is hand harvesting. California is hand harvesting. This number here on the second row, contract labor and harvest-related cost, is a little bit messy on the machine harvest because it includes not just labor, it includes a few other things. But nonetheless, we come up with a total labor cost, and then down here at the bottom, labor as a percentage of their total cost. As you might guess, Oregon and California are 58 and 77% respectively as their labor cost as a percent of the total. The lowest of the other three, Washington, is 38%, so almost 40. Nothing surprising there. This was a study by E&J Gallo Winery, and they show some similar numbers for canopy management in the Central Valley of California compared to the coastal region. They've got over 22% for canopy management, which is mainly shoot thinning, leaf removal, those kind of things that are kind of unique to grapes. Pruning, of course, is a big one, as it is with blueberries. And then harvest. So their numbers kind of show the same thing. Labor in general can be over 50% of the total. And these three practices kind of dominate that labor cost or drive it. Oregon blueberries, just for comparison, and I picked organic blueberries in the Willamette Valley because it was very convenient. I think Rod sent it to me. It kind of fell into my lap. Once again, we've got hand harvest on the left, machine harvest on the right. Hand harvest, obviously a lot more, but if we look down here at the percentage of the total, kind of similar to wine grapes, we got almost 30% under the machine harvest. And with the hand harvest, we've got 74%. These are just cash expenses. So if I'm machine harvesting, I probably got a lot of expense of owning that machine that's showing up through depreciation, which is a fixed cost and isn't showing up here. Okay, with wine grapes, and I think Rod kind of alluded to this with blueberries, but with wine grapes over the last, I don't know how many years, maybe 20 years. Some of you might know this better than I do, but there's been a lot of mechanized equipment that's been developed. The problem is it doesn't do a precision type of a job like you want with wine grapes. One example of that would be this box hedger, which is basically an attachment to a tractor. It's got circular saw blades on it, and it cuts off a lot of the vines, fairly quickly and with not much labor. But you still have to come back by hand and do some more precision type pruning on something like that. So these help with labor, but they're not the answer. But nonetheless, E&J Gallo did a a survey amongst California growers and kind of looked at what's been the uptake of this kind of technology, this kind of equipment, including harvesting. And harvesting is like blueberries. We've had machine harvesters for probably 40 or 50 years. And I'm surprised 85% of the acres or the growers say that they're using, they have adopted machine harvest. And what that tells me then is we've got about 15% of the acres that are producing wine grapes for premium wine. And if you don't know what premium wine is, that's the kind of wine that's kind of priced out of my price range. You know, maybe $75 a bottle. It's kind of out of my league. Those guys and gals like to hand harvest. That's kind of the perception of people that like to drink high dollar wine, is that it's been hand harvested. Anyway, pruning, pre-pruning with hand follow-up, about 50% of the acres are doing that. Box hedging with little or no follow-up, less than 10%. Minimal pruning, less than 1%. Leaf removal, about 35%. I was a little surprised that wasn't higher. Shoot thinning is less than 10. Hedging, which is similar to this box hedging circular saw blade device that I described. Pretty high there, almost 95% of the acres are using that. Shoot positioning less than 1, and cluster removal also less than 1. Okay, why aren't we seeing a higher adoption rate on some of these mechanized practices, with the exception of machine harvesting, excuse me, and then hedging, where we've got over 85% on both of those? Well, one reason is probably labor availability and cost. Labor gets more expensive, especially in California. And the labor supply is going down, but it still hasn't got to that point where it's forcing people to adopt mechanized practices. And then, like I said earlier, lack of precision. If it doesn't offer that, I'm sure to some people, they're probably thinking, why should I switch to that? It might solve part of my problem, but it's not going to solve all of my problems. With wine grapes, some production or trellis systems just really aren't suitable for mechanized practices, such as the sprawl system, where you've got wires up pretty high, the vines grow up and over, and it's just a different setup than the VSP system, which is in this little image down below. Fruit quality and perception concerns. Like I said, some people that are growing higher end wine grapes, they want to do things by hand, or they're going to wait till there's some kind of robotic technology developed that can do things by hand and do it as good as a human can. Lastly, maybe some of this mechanization was developed for the wrong reason. I think most of it was kind of sold and marketed to the industry from a cost reduction aspect, rather than the focus being on, I said, the positive impact on grape and wine quality. I could probably also say I don't know that it has to be a positive impact. If it's just not causing a negative impact, that would be acceptable as well. Okay, let's shift gears and talk about robotics a little bit. It's becoming more and more common with defense, healthcare, which I think, Rod, you talked about, surgical procedures, and I think a lot of us would not have a problem with going under the knife and a robot operating on us. But some of us would probably be a little bit leery about having a robot run down through our blueberry farm doing anything. We've got too much money at stake. Someday that's going to change, I promise you. Enhanced dexterity, control, imaging. A lot of people have talked about that this morning, and I think we'll get more of that this afternoon. When we talk about dexterity, I'm talking about how a robot can kind of mimic a human hand. And I know Google and probably others have been doing research on that, and they've got, I don't know how many robots, maybe 20 or 50 of them in a line that I've read an article about, and all they do is they reach their arm out and they're picking up, they got several things that are kind of being a box type configuration. And they pick it up, drop it, they pick it up, drop it. They do that thousands of times a day. And what they're measuring and tracking is how many of those pickups and drops were correct. And I think they're also measuring when they pick something up, are they damaging it or not, depending on what they're picking up. So a lot of advances there. A lot of people are working on that. Unmanned vehicles, cars without drivers. I probably better pick up the pace. I don't know what time it is. Robotic pruner, we've got 2 that are in developmental stages, one in France, one in California. I'll hit on that in a minute. Back to our grant project. I know with wine grapes, a lot of people think about pruning. That's something that uses a lot of labor. People would love to have some kind of technology that could do that. When we met with our grower panels, we asked them, where are the pinch points with your labor and the things that you've got to do in the vineyard? And if you had to give us 3 things where you could really use some technology, what would it be? And the results across all the states, the panels that we worked with are right here. And also, we kind of threw out a couple of things that were given to us because we didn't think they were that suitable for being automated. But so our project has been looking at everything that goes on in the vineyard, and if we think it can be automated, then we're leaving it on the table. So this is just a list of a lot of things, just individual production tasks in the vineyard. Autonomous tractor here, I think somebody mentioned earlier. That's what this table is about. Each column represents one of the states that we worked with for wine grapes. And these are the boring numbers that Rod warned me about and warned you about, but I put these 2 yellow arrows, so ignore everything above here. This is the labor cost for equipment operators. So this is the hours. And we've got somebody sitting on a tractor or sitting on some kind of piece of equipment. And then the equipment, the cost, so when we multiply by the wage rate, including benefits. So we're spending per acre, there's one in Texas, almost $500 an acre per year on somebody driving a tractor. So if you've got a 100-acre vineyard, that's almost $50,000. I would think we could get an autonomous unmanned tractor as well. More boring numbers. These are wage rates, counting benefits. I'm going to skip past that because I do want to touch on this. These are more boring numbers. They all relate, and I'm not going to bore you with all this. My point is, we tried to calculate for all those tasks I showed you earlier for what the vineyards are spending on labor to do those things. If the technology was developed, what would it have to be priced at such that the growers are equal? So the cost of the technology and owning it and operating it is equal to the cost of doing it with labor, because we think a robotic technology company needs to know that. That's kind of what the target audience was for that. All this table here is a bunch of assumptions we made in trying to calculate that for spur pruning. And that's the only thing that we made assumptions like that with. All these other tasks, we just assumed that the technology would be equal to the speed of a human. So the only thing we want to look at here is this column that I circled. This is the net present value, which is simply a financial summation over 7 years. We assume the technology's got a 7-year life. So we calculated, okay, what's the labor cost over a 7-year period in today's dollars? That's what this is for each of these practices. And they're kind of sorted in order from smallest, lowest cost at top, down to the bottom, the largest. The column to the right is, okay, what's the price? If we had technology, how much would you be willing to pay for it if you wanted to keep your cost equal to what you're doing now? That's what we've got here. Manual harvest is a lot, $460-something thousand, because we spend a lot of money on hand harvest for California. This is California. For 100 acres? I think that's 30 acres. That's a great question. Yes. 30 acres. Table grapes in California is 100 acres. And that's what the grower said was kind of typical for their area, which was Napa Valley. Okay, same table for Texas. I don't know how much time I've got.
Well, you're a minus 5 minutes.
Okay, we're good. Same thing for Texas. Kind of interesting here. Here's the wage rate. So in Texas, they're paying equipment operators a little over $20 an hour, counting benefits. But there's a pretty big gap in what they pay their field workers. They're getting paid less, and that's about $11 an hour. Well, for those tasks that are done by what I'm calling field workers, we can't develop the technology for a price that's cheaper than what you're doing to do it by hand. So that's kind of some of the quirky stuff that kind of shows up in these numbers. Spur pruning here, $195, almost $200,000 would be the technology equivalent price. 2 minutes? I'm going to get done in plenty of time. Okay, I think there's a couple of slides here I want to wrap up with. Where is this technology headed? And one thing, and I know a couple of people, and you were there at the Unified Wine Grape Symposium 2 years ago. Yeah, you were one of the speakers. And that, from what I heard, that was the first time they ever had a session at that conference and trade show on mechanization, precision mechanization. And one thing I heard a lot that day was no-touch vineyard. That's where the growers want to move to eventually, is a no-touch vineyard where nobody's making any physical contact with anything. We're fully automated. So where are we headed in the short term? If the labor supply and the increasing cost, especially in California with their new higher minimum wage law, and I think some of them are going to get hit with paying overtime that they didn't have to in the past. That's probably going to force some people to adopt some of those mechanized practices that I showed you earlier, like the box pruner. There'll be a little bit more of that. Robotic pruning. A company called Vision Robotics has been working on developing a pruner. It's been grower financed. I think the growers at some point kind of ran out of patience. They're probably out of sync with a realistic timeline on what it takes to develop a product like that. I'm probably not in sync with that myself. But anyway, that's who was financing it, was growers. I think there are some hardware enhancements that at least that's what they told me, that they'd like to incorporate into this before they take it to market. But I think they'll have something on the market in the next year or two. So then we'll have a learning curve or an adoption curve with growers gaining trust in this new product. Anyway, that's kind of floating out there on the horizon. Long term, where are we headed? As somebody alluded to earlier, I mean, the hardware technology, the sensors and the vision continue to advance, it seems like on a daily basis. I think in order to kind of expedite the timeline on all of this, if we could get growers, get industry and technology developers to working together in kind of a systems approach to this, and this is probably really pie in the sky thinking, but if we could get growers to gradually move to a more uniform trellis and production system and kind of make it a little more of a friendly environment for technology developers. I think they have enough challenges to deal with as it is without adding, some of those difficulties like that. So yeah, and trying to make the market attractive for technology developers. And that's basically what I've been doing, is kind of running around trying to sell this idea for the last 6 months, kind of using that build it and they will come philosophy. Another point is that I would encourage the blueberry industry is to know who those ag technology companies are. I mean, who is out there that you ought to be talking to about trying to attract into developing technology for the industry. Second to last point here, and really kind of talking about the precision ag technology, more of the field mapping, fertilizer, irrigation, that kind of stuff. I mean, in my view, the cost benefit of all of that is too complicated. I mean, to me, it's hard to tell, is this worth my time or not? And I think with new robotic technology or whatever kind of technology we want to call it, I think to expedite the adoption rate of it, we need to make it more obvious. And I think with what we're talking about, labor-saving technology, I think it is going to be more obvious. Lastly, contracting arrangements. I think that's an option with a lot of this technology, is that you as a grower might not own it and might not have to maintain it and learn how to maintain it. There may be some other arrangements with the owner of that technology. So Rod, that's it. I don't know if there's time for questions or comments. Probably not.
One quick one.
Are you going to have any trial programs for the growers to participate in with these manufacturers and technology? Any type of trial programs for the growers to participate in?
Well, yeah, and right now we're trying to find a company that's willing to come in, that's interested in wine grapes, sees the potential and comes in. And I think after that point, there will definitely be interaction with growers. I think that's the only way to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.
Okay, thanks.
Good afternoon. And boy, I'm glad to see there's quite a few interested people here. My name is Mike McCara, and I'm from British Columbia, Canada. And I find it kind of ironic that a farmer, or ex-farmer, is introducing quite a technical group of panelists. And I see the following four guests coming up here as researchers and innovators of technologies that we hope that our industry, the blueberry industry, will be able to leverage in the future. So the format will be that I will ask these panelists up here one at a time, and they'll make their presentation, and hopefully, unless they're very self-conscious, they will stay up here so they can, as a whole group, later answer questions. So the first speaker or presenter is Dr. Qing Zhang, and he's born in China. Received his Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from Zhejiang Agriculture University in China, and has his master's from the University of Idaho and a PhD degree from University of Illinois, both in agriculture engineering. He also worked as a senior research engineer at Caterpillar before joining the faculty at UIUC. Anyway, Dr. Zhang is a director of the Center for Precision and Automated Agricultural Systems of Washington State University and a professor of agricultural automation in the Department of Biological Systems Engineering at WSU, that's Washington State University. His research interests are in the area of agricultural automation, agricultural robotics, and precision agriculture. He's authored over 300 papers, authored 4 books, and he holds more than 10 patents. So I would like to welcome Dr. Zhang.
Well, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thought on agricultural robotics. And this is not a presentation. I was told this is panels discussion. So instead of introduce the technology, I just give some very quick overview, and then I will give, rather to have time to answer your questions. Okay, so. Okay, first, just like Mike said, I'm from Washington State University, so we work for land-grant university. We support for the local agriculture industry. And then the agriculture in Washington, we have more than 200 commodity crops. And among them, a lot of, the total value is more than $10 billion US, and with tree fruit, apple, cherry, and blueberry, and those fruits are on top of those crops. And another thing, when we work with technology, we find out one very interesting factor is more than 95% of the growers are family industry. Okay, and that means oftentimes they have a limited technology capability to support a really fancy technology. And this is something we need to keep in mind. And then everybody said labor shortage is a big issue in this industry. So for the what we call the Washington State Center for Precision and Automated Agricultural Systems, we basically is a multidisciplinary team to address the automation and mechanization for specialty crop, including blueberry, tree fruit, blueberry, and so forth. So we do work on quite a few crops, and but because of time limit, I will not go detail on that. And since this topic is on the agricultural robotics, and for the fundamental technology of robotics, basically is just like a human, the machine like a human. We need to be able to see it, need to be able to reach it, need to be able to grab and remove it, and then need to be able to place the thing to the right place. Okay, and then in our team, in the past 8-9 years, we worked for more than 10 either called autonomous machinery or robotic machinery for all different kind of applications, agricultural applications. And here I'm not able to show all of them, but I just show 3 examples. The first example, I do not know how to make it play with the, no? What? Okay. So this is an apple pick robot. And from here you can see, and the robot first finds the apple, picks the apple, and put it down to a receiver of that. And this machine, currently, we test that a few times in the past few years in the commercial orchard. And at this point, we can reach 5 seconds per apple, and which is a research prototype. It's a bit slower because we use computers instead of controllers. But if we really move to the product, I think it is achievable to 2 to 3 seconds per apple. It's still slow, but it's getting there. The second, this is the Kimberry bundling and tying robot. And this is also shows one of the robot technology we have been developed in our team. And then the third one, it's quite different. It's for hop production. If we can move to the last, yeah. So the twine operation is one of the very tiresome and labor cost operation. And we work with one of our growers and build this twine robot, and which worked fairly well. And it's not as fast as human can do, but it can do very reliably and successfully, and at a successful rate of more than 95%. Okay, so those are the 3 examples. We have a lot more, but during this research, as a university researcher, we are not in to develop a product, so you guys can use it. But we try to develop a technology, and during the process, we do find a lot of interesting, learn a lot of interesting things which can support manufacturers to build a better machine. For example, when we grab the apples, when human to pick the apple and a robot pick apple, there's a lot of difference because of the way of picking apple. And such kind of difference may cause excessive bruising when we use a robot to pick apple than human. Okay, what caused that? And this are some of the researches we try to find out with the robot arm or robot fingers where the damages or the bruising are most likely to occur. And then when we design those robot hands, we can avoid such kind of excessive impact force. And also, this could be, this is for mass apple harvesting, but this could be easily applied to blueberry harvesting. The thing is, when you use shake and catch method of harvesting apples, and bruising is a big issue, big challenge. Okay, it can reach very high speed, but it also can cause very high rate of bruising. How to reduce such kind of bruising? And we have done quite a few extensive researches. And one method here is we use airflow bed. Okay, so the air is blowing from bottom up, and then when we catch the apple, so apple will not hit the catching flame hardly. So there's use kind of floating force to reduce the impact. And from our research, we find out this can very effectively reduce the bruising rate. From the lab test, we find out the bruising rate can be controlled less than 5% through the catching process. Okay, however, there are still a lot of challenges in adapting robotic technologies into practice. And I just list a few. For example, the trees are four-dimensional. X, Y, Z varies the variation. For most of the things, the variation is not a big deal, but for robotic, variation is a big challenge. Okay, because there's no tree in the world, no two trees in the world is growing exactly the same. And even on the same trees, the fruit does not grow in the same places, same orientation year after year. So this is a big challenge for robotic technology. And I will not, because of time, I will not explain all of them, but here's one thing we find out. Instead of make a very complicated robot, make it able to handle all the situations, can we change our mind to modify our trees, to make it more machine, more robot friendly? For example, if we have the conventional trees like this, it will cost a lot of time to find the apple, to approach the apple. But if we simplify the canopy to this, it will make it much easier. But however, if we further simplify the canopy to this, that will make robotic harvesting much, much easier job. Okay, and then there's several issues we need to keep in mind. For the technology, should we develop the most fancy technology possible? Okay, for example, robot bee for pollination. Technology, from technology point of view, it's achievable. But this is practically acceptable by today. Okay, second, robotic technology oftentimes takes a long development, research and development cycle. For example, Dean mentioned about the vision robotics. Vision robotics has been worked on develop a kind of a field robot for more than 10 years. But still, the product is not out yet. So that means it takes a very long R&D cycle. And so we need to have some patience. Third, when we have the machine, when we have the robot, is our workforce ready to operate, to use it yet? Maybe you guys can answer that question much better. Is our current labor force can comfortably operate, manage the robot? Okay, and that comes to almost my last slide. Do you think robot can really replace human? Robot may able to replace some of the work we're doing, but instead replace human, we may just change humans' job from the tough, hard field work to even harder machine maintenance, management, supervision work. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very illuminating. I appreciate it. I know Washington State University has a great drone program, and I met one of the operators a few years back trying to fly over blueberry fields because they couldn't get licensed in Washington State. So they came up to British Columbia, and I sent them out to some fields, and the field scanning infrared of plant health was just fantastic. So good to have a neighbor so close and so good. Our next presenter is Nathan Dorn. Has been at Reader affiliated companies for 6 years. His responsibilities include facilitating the innovation of the systems that complicate and limit the development of agribusiness, specifically focusing on constrained resources of labor, money, and time. Prior to joining Reader, he was an engineering and maintenance manager and later a director of technical services at Gallo Family Vineyards, the maintenance supervisor at Pepsi Bottling, and a nuclear machinist mate in the U.S. Navy. He has a BA degree from the University of Phoenix and an EMBA from Pepperdine Graziosi School of Business. He is a startup team member for Food Origins. So I'd like to welcome Nathan. Thank you.
Thanks for having me here today. I'm no longer with Ryder, as many of you know already, but and today I work as CEO of my own private company, Food Origins. You know, a lot of you guys we talked a little bit about Granular, a company that sold for $300 million recently, and then Farmers Business Network. Those companies were built on data that was too much data or too complicated for us to look at every day. Those companies are companies that took that information and found the common intersections. The intersections of information that did that. So we do that same thing for hand-picked crops. A lot of this work has been done for row crops and everywhere a machine has been used for years. But when we have people in the field, we limit our data sets to only where the edges of the field are, where we take the product out and we measure what? Payroll or yield and payroll. We don't measure the other intersections of plant by plant, bush by bush, how much time each person spends, how far apart every person takes to fill a box. And those are data points we start to capture, and we overlap them with other data that's in the industry. We capture it pretty simply. We capture with a GPS data collector, not much bigger than this. It's got a single button on it that is of matter, and the person scans the box in the field, and they capture who did it, where they were, what they did, and when they did it. We'll take that data and overlap it in the block, and we'll build insights. Today, when you do it at the edge of field, all your insights are made up of data points coming to one spot. But if you had the power to check out your entire field and measure things as they happen across the measures, you'd learn a lot more data. When I worked at Gallo years ago, I remember sitting in a meeting, I think Michael was even there. Our boss said, it's obvious to me we need to only farm these little point rows, these little blocks that have the turnarounds on the hillsides. And it was because the way we farmed, we sprayed through them, and it was too much work to cross over our data collection. So they have never had any cost, never had any chemical spray, never pruning cost. It was just too difficult to manage. Well, we can put that data out on the people that do the work easily now, just like Google does. Google today tells us not only how fast we're going down the highway, but what the best route is because they're measuring everybody else. That's insights built from IoT. So a lot of that insights are forecasting data that's coming out of the field. This is a mock-up of a report to a farmer in live data saying, you've got X amount of productivity happening in the field per labor, you've got 10 people reporting in the field, you've progressed 25% of the way through the field. And it's 10 a.m. We can see already you're gonna pick about 88% of the field, you're gonna leave behind a few hundred crates, or you're gonna need to bring out 7 people right now to finish the job on time. That's revenue loss, that's actionable stuff. It's all information that you know often as farmers every day, but you can't see because you're being commanded to farm more places, more locations, more complicated crops, and faster, make decisions faster every day. In the strawberry industry, we're measuring people as they walk through the field. This is 9 people, walking side by side. And as you can see, as they walk through the field, we measure how many boxes they carry out of the field. And everybody carries a different amount of fruit through the field, even though they walk the same distance. What's happening there? Well, it's just like an apple orchard. One guy's taller than the other, he can reach a few more apples. But you fill the box either way. You just have to walk further or you can reach higher. That's happening in a strawberry field all the time. You're leaving behind good fruit, or there's some reason for it. It's not that some AI company is going to come and tell you what's going on. They're going to tell you where to look and who to ask and wonder why. And you're going to create a continuous improvement cycle as a business. In this case, you can see right here, you could call it fraud or theft, but this is one guy standing in a single spot scanning 6 boxes all at once. He might have been scanning his neighbor's box, and that might be why he's ahead and they're behind. So we'll take that same information, and you all collect maps today already. It's other data that you're carrying in the field. And everybody's field's got interplanted product, test blocks. You've sprayed different applications throughout there, different plant dates. And so our data pods might be, for the way we collect data today, might be full blocks, right? But that isn't how we farm. In this case, those same blocks were planted in those dates. They're planted with these varieties. And in this case, there's a little red dot there that we correlated here. That dot was picked by a guy named Albert, and these are all the maps that fall underneath him. That's all information that he can query later. We know what well it was that produced that product. We know what the water quality was. And if you started to ask questions, you can start to compare where your products are. You know what soil types, it's all maps and data that you have already in your fingertips. What you didn't have in a hand-picked crop was that intersection of your product out to those data points that you're capturing already. We can take our data and overlap with other good products that are mapping other parts of your business, like spraying and other activities. So we also use this data for other important components, though. This is a job management system. It helps you get the guy running the spray tractor in the right field at the right time. Make sure that he doesn't miss parts and that he doesn't, and he goes back and covers the whole field and doesn't overlap. Well, I believe that you're going to use this data. I think this data is really valuable to you. You're going to use it to pick blueberries or to give a guy the data behind how much that robot, as Mr. McCorkle or Professor McCorkle said, how much that robot should cost. And everybody knows in this room, especially, that blueberries are different everywhere throughout the country. You can be in British Columbia and take 2 harvests, 3 harvests to get through a crop, or you can be in Florida and take 11. You're hitting the same plant 11 times. You can be in Oxnard, California, where you're getting $7, $8 a pound, or you can be in Brooks, Oregon, and getting about 49, 50 cents a pound for your blueberries. You've got IQF, fresh, you've got process and juice. All those are different markets, and you're doing those things partly because of that bush. That bush has some green berries on it, some blueberries. The more blue they are, the more likely you are to get to a machine. But it's also the curse of it. The price goes down, and that causes all sorts of things. It causes you to be able to walk away from those berries you dropped on the ground, or to tolerate having hundreds and hundreds of people in your field at a time. So we did some work back at the Ryder days with that easy harvester that you spoke of so kindly earlier, and we tried to make it work for us. We thought picking by hand's easiest. Let's just stick it in there. We took it to Florida, found out it didn't work for them because they harvested 6 times and too many green berries were being pushed off. It was too big of a burden to push through. Did it again in Southern California, Fresno, Northern California. Finally, we got it to work. We got 8 times the productivity of the hand harvested crew we had out there almost overnight. Those people made $45 an hour, and they wanted to work for us for the next year. That's solving the labor problem. That's taking that data and applying it to you, because you're the ones that are going to be able to have that action. you're going to know that that same tool does or doesn't apply. There's a lot of great machine builders here that have built a system. You got to know if it works for you and if you can make it fit in your system. This is early work from years ago, shaking off blueberries in Oregon as well, Claxonai, with Professor Miles from UC Davis. We shook off using a shaker and we got some of that green fruit. We evaluated that versus the blue. Decided that these shaker tools didn't necessarily work in that geography, and that's why we moved partly toward the hand. That was impacted a little bit by wage rates because they were cheaper in those years, and a lot by price. That's when the price was still good. Now I bet I could walk away from more of that. And that is reflected here. You're hit by these big market curves and big volumes of production, causing your price to dip when volume goes low. And that volume there is really the governance. And you can see it year over year. It's really hard to see through the noise, the little spikes, but it's the same trend. Year over year, when the volume hits, price goes down, that really governs why the machines work in our fields and what machines and what tools we're going to use. So we went out and took that data and we used it to build the green machine that Connie presented earlier today. And that machine didn't have everything in place, as Dr. Takeda pointed out. We've still got work to do, but our data sets, again, are the ones that are facilitating that. In other work, we categorized out that robotics. And we took that other work in the robotics thing, there's path planning, there's vision, there's the manipulation, but we looked at haptics as being one of our big problems. So rather than build a robot that had all the haptics activities, we found a guy who was an amputee who had a robotic hand. And we went out and had him do the testing for us. We could successfully pick raspberries at the same quality that a hand pick was. You couldn't tell any difference. But strawberries, we had zero success. We couldn't figure out why, because a strawberry is a lot more durable than a raspberry. But really, it's that there's another feature. It's that degree of freedom. You have a wrist, and you break that raspberry off the stem. You don't pull it. Whereas a strawberry. Whereas a raspberry, you pull every one of them. So I've said all of this, and my job with Ryder, with Gallo, and now it's to think about it differently. And that one of the things I want to point out is if you think about this differently, there's nanotechnology, there's molecular science that's helping. There's a company in Santa Barbara called Appeal Sciences. They're taking molecules from your grapes, from your berries, and putting them back on later as a second skin. It comes out as a dry formula. They're already doing it in avocados, making it possible to ship avocados in slow freight all the way up here. But they've tested blueberries. And I think in 6 to 8 months, they should be able to do more in blueberries. They can just apply that same natural organic skin back on there, and then probably on your process line, and arrest that bruise by limiting how fast it can breathe oxygen in and out, and basically stop some of that leakage where that mold and other contamination happens. It can extend the shelf life by days, reducing weight loss, and almost by half, saving the sugars from going up, concentration due to evaporation. That's what will happen without it. And 10 days later, it's nearly the same for sugar content, and the acidity inside stays the same. So they have done a lot of work on all these crops. This is a video I'm going to stop with, but this is what they do. They're putting that second skin on these different crops. It's fairly impressive to see what will happen with desiccation and age. That's what our perishability is all about. But if you turn around and look at it, if we can stop that, you can double or triple the shelf life of your product and kind of make it possible for mechanization. We did this in blueberries, our first trials. They said, we want to just take some hand-picked blueberries and treat them, and we'll see how long the hand-picked lasts versus the treated hand-picked. And I said, no. We took the hand-picked and we didn't treat it. And then I took the remaining berries, I took them to the second floor of the building and dropped them to the ground. We bruised them, just like what we thought a machine harvester would. And then we treated it, and they still outlasted the hand-picked berries. That's the cool part. that's what else can help you in bringing this mechanical technology to fruition. Thanks. I think that ends right about here. All right. Oops. There you go. Thank you.
It's funny that he should end with the appeal thing, because I learned about appeal about 2 years ago. And I emailed the company. I wanted to invest some money, but they're not public. And they don't want little guys like me bugging them. But they did put me on the register, sent me news. And if you Google appeal, you will see all these and others. What great, I guess, biological manipulations they can do to preserve product. I have one other comment about being profitable is minimizing losses. All us crude machine harvesting people, which we did a lot of, had 3 harvesters, we actually counted how many green berries in a pound of blue crop. Then we counted how many blueberries would be in a pound. We calculated that for each pound of green blueberries we picked of the blue crop variety by machine would have translated to 2.5, 2.6 pounds of ripe berries if we hadn't trashed those green berries off the bushes. So even at your regular old farm level, farmers can kind of develop a little techniques to find out and assist themselves. So thank you. That was really good. I appreciate it. Our next presenter is Rory. Rory Franklin, sorry. And he's CEO of Franklin Robotics. And he is hands-on technology leader who has developed multiple robotic platforms with a focus on mobile outdoor robots. After starting mobile robots, Adept working on a variety of indoor and outdoor robots, Rory joined Harvest Automation, helping to develop the HV100 agricultural robot. Prior to founding Franklin, Rory worked at Super Pedestrian on the Copenhagen Wheel. With a background in mechanical engineering from MIT and MS from Rensselaer and engineering management, Roy has had deep experience in all aspects of developing mobile robots. And I did Google Franklin too, because I'm very curious about all these issues, and I saw your robot working. So it's very interesting. Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks. It's been a really informative session. I'm really excited to be here. So my name is Rory McKean. I'm the CEO of a company called Franklin Robotics. We're a startup. We're outside Boston, and we're focused on mobile robots for agriculture. And so in particular, we are interested in the task of weeding. So weeding is interesting from a robotics perspective for a couple reasons. One of the biggest ones is that it's a task that is well suited to robotics because you can take away the element of time, which makes it a really interesting application. So there's a couple applications, vacuuming, floor cleaning, and lawn mowing, and weeding are tasks that are really suitable for robotics. But sort of stepping back, I think what's interesting about it is we're interested in reducing the amount of herbicides that we as a society use. You know, there's a cost to it, but also sort of an environmental cost. So we just, my co-founder and I got really interested in this particular space. And we're interested in having robots that have a purpose out in the field. And then once they have a reason for being out in a field, it opens the door to all sorts of value adds where you can get into monitoring and analysis and recommendations and things like that that provide added value to the grower. So I met my co-founder Joe as we mentioned, at a company called Harvest Automation. So Harvest Automation makes robots for the ornamental horticulture industry. Basically, we make robots that move potted plants around, which is a really interesting application. And that's where Joe and I, who really are both robot guys, got interested in agriculture in the first place. Prior to founding Harvest, Joe was at iRobot for a long, long time. He was actually first employee there. He's inventor of the Roomba, the little vacuum cleaner. So Joe and I share a love of robots, and we're really interested in agriculture, and that's what got us started at Franklin. So we were interested in making a weeding robot. And there's two ways you can go. One is a consumer product, and one is a commercial product for farms and places that grow things. And for a couple of reasons, we decided to start with a consumer application. Part of this is Joe's background with the Roomba, but part of this was we had an immediate understanding of the need for gardeners, and we didn't quite understand the needs of commercial growers at that point yet. So we started with the consumer application. And it's sort of straightforward. We're making a robot for the home garden. People like having gardens. They like to grow things in their backyard. It's a pretty big market, but when you talk to growers, what you find out is they like growing things. They like having a garden. If they didn't, they wouldn't have a garden. But the weeding part sucks. So they find that really frustrating. If you're young and healthy, it's just annoying to have to get out there and pull the weeds. As you get older, it gets harder to bend over, harder to pick the weeds, and it becomes more painful. Which is troubling when you suddenly have more time because you're retired and you can garden if you can't do it anymore. So when you think about how you get rid of weeds in a garden, you can use chemicals. And if you're going to grow food for your family, that's probably not something you want to do. You can pull the weeds out by hand, or you can make a robot do it. And we said, okay, so let's make a robot. So we designed Turtle. So Turtle is a solar-powered robot. It lives in your vegetable garden or flower garden. And every day it'll charge itself up in the sunlight. When the battery gets full, it'll wander around. It avoids any plants or obstacles or anything that's taller than an inch. And then as it's doing that, it's looking for any weeds, which it cuts with a little weed whacker that's on the bottom of the robot. So we wanted to make it really simple to use. So there's no programming. You don't need to define boundaries. You can just kind of put it out there and let it go. And so what we'll use is the natural boundaries that are around a garden, so like a fence or a rock border or something like that. That'll keep the robot from wandering away. You can connect to it with a smartphone if you want to see what's going on, but you don't need to. Basically, I wanted to make it something that my parents could use without calling me and asking how it works. And it's a really good design philosophy, I think. So what we did is, financing is always hard, particularly for a hardware company, for any company, but hardware in particular, where the costs are really front-loaded. So what we did is we did a Kickstarter, which is great for hardware companies like us because you can say, here's what I want to make, and people will give you money before you make it. And you can use that money to go make it, which is great. So we did a Kickstarter campaign this past summer, and we pre-sold a bunch of robots, and now we're making those robots. So now the pressure's on because we have everyone's money. We need to go make it. So we sold the robot for $250. We think sort of at retail it'll turn into more like a $300 product, but it's coming along great, which is super exciting. So here's a little video. Yeah. So here's the robot as it's running around. Just to give you some idea of how it works. It's sort of similar to a robot. It's about 8 inches in diameter, maybe about 4 inches tall, weighs 2 pounds or so. But basically it'll charge itself up, the battery gets full, and it drives around. And it'll avoid any plants as it does it. And then it has some sensors on the bottom, so if it detects a weed as it's driving, it'll turn on the weed whacker and cut it. So pretty simple, but pretty useful, and people seem to really like the idea. But I think, as we look at where the company is going to go, we're actually more interested in moving back into commercial agriculture, which is what Joe and I sort of started the idea with. And what we're looking for is the right application for our robots. And the things that sort of are interesting to us is, we need a market where there are labor pressures, and people want to reduce the amount of labor. If we can reduce the amount of herbicides that are used, that's fantastic. But we need to find a crop that's sort of suitable. So what we need is a crop that's really structured. And this is why blueberries and grapes, which are grown in rows, which are sort of mature plants, and have some sort of structure that the robot can leverage to help it navigate and figure out where it is in the world. Those are the ones that are really interesting. Since we have this sort of, it's a bit simplistic approach, which I think is a feature for discerning plants from weeds, which is based solely on the height. That sidesteps a whole lot of complexity and cost in the robot. So anything where we can safely say tall things are good and short things are bad is fantastic. Grapes and blueberries are really interesting. So what our vision is actually a robot that looks remarkably like Turtle. And this is sort of an idea that we had all along. But we see a fleet of these robots that are out taking care of the weeding on a regular basis as an interesting approach. So we tend to build little capable robots instead of enormous robots that cost 5 or 6 figures. We are thinking much more of little robots and a fleet of them that can work together and work cooperatively and cover the field and go out and they'll do the weeding constantly. So that's sort of our idea. And then once the robot is out there, then it opens the door to gathering data, putting it together, looking for interesting patterns, making recommendations as to, there's too much water here, there's a leak, there's not any water here, you should check that out. These plants are healthy, these plants are not, that sort of thing. But by virtue of having a large number of smaller robots, it also opens the door to much smaller growers. So they don't need to make such a large initial investment to try out the technology. And if it works, you buy more robots and they cover more area. So that's our idea, and that's what we're working on. The consumer product, we'll be shipping that out this spring. The commercial one, what we're looking to do is to do some prototyping this summer and kind of get robots out into the field so we can start to learn. And then, we see sort of commercial applications, maybe some limited ones next year, but most likely the year after that. It all takes time. That's what I got. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's good. I did see that. So all you people, Google these firms because you can see all this up over and over and maybe get some ideas yourself. The next presenter is Brad Anderson. Now, I've seen Yamaha and their big heli drone on YouTube quite a while ago, quite a few years ago, and I think I was really impressed at that time. So I'm really happy to welcome Brad Anderson. He's a division manager for Yamaha Motor Corporation in the Unmanned System Division. Prior to joining Yamaha, Brad earned a BA and an MBA degree from the University of California, Riverside. In 2008, Brad joined Yamaha in their General Affairs Division, and after a couple of years moved to the Corporate Planning Division. Brad has worked on a variety of corporate initiatives, including projects related to corporate governance, business continuity planning. I guess you blanked out on the rest part, but yeah, please fill in the blank. And I'd really like to welcome you to this thing. Brad is an alternate for Mr. Kellerman, who is, I believe, his boss, but he got called away. So he was gracious enough at the last minute to fill in and really welcome. Thank you.
Thank you guys for allowing us to come and speak with you. The most common question we always get is, what does Yamaha have to do with agriculture? And it's always, to many people's surprise, that we've actually been producing platforms for aerial applications since the early 90s, and this is for commercial use. This is something that's been used in Japan since 1991. About 40% of all rice paddies in Japan are sprayed from an unmanned helicopter that's used through RC remote control operations. Yamaha has actually produced 3 separate platforms. They started with a unit called the R50. They advanced to the R-Max, and then the R-Max Type 2, and then most recently the Phaser and Phaser R. With each improvement in the platform, there was either an improvement in control operations or payload. To date, Yamaha's produced over 5,000 helicopters. There's over 2 million flight hours on the R-Max alone. So I don't know what the total is across all 3 platforms. And currently, it is limited on the countries in which it's used. So right now, they are approved to be used in Japan, Korea, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, and here in the US. So what are we doing here in the US? Total new different type of business for Yamaha. Instead of selling our product, letting you go out and have fun with it, we're starting a service business. So it's a typical spray service operation where the grower will hire us. We come out, bring our equipment, we'll spray your field, pack everything up and leave. We did just launch this last year. Right now it's available only in Napa and Sonoma. We're doing fungicide applications for wine grapes. Prior to that, we had been working with UC Davis just to prove that it is a viable platform since 2015. The equipment that's involved in each application, obviously the helicopter, couldn't bring it here, but the R-Max is about 12 feet long, weighs 205 pounds. We also have a Viking. It's a side-by-side that we've modified, and that's our loading platform. So we did create a custom closed loading system that you can see here at the bottom. And then we also use a backpack sprayer. We're typically a replacement for a backpack sprayer, but sometimes there's small areas where a tree could overhang in an area, or there's a pole in the field, things of that nature. And our crew typically last year was 3 people. It is a minimum of 2, a pilot and a visual observer. Pilot obviously is self-explanatory. The observer is kind of more of like a flagger function. He's helping control the pilot in terms of the latter half of the field, keeping it clear, letting him know to when he gets to the end of the field. Last year we used a loader handler, which did all the chemical loading and handling. But in the future, we do see that role being shared by both the pilot and observer. Just to give you a brief idea of what our operation is like, one thing that's unique to our operation is we always fly nose out. So we spray forward and backwards. It's really pretty simple for 2 simple reasons. First, left's always left, right's always right. Makes it much easier for the pilot. Secondly, we're always in the applicating field. You know, from our understanding, a lot of drift occurs when an aircraft turns. We're never turning. We're never leaving the application field. We're typically about 10 feet above the crop and spraying at about 10 to 12 miles per hour. To give you an idea of the operation, our setup time takes about 45 minutes. That includes chemical loading, all the checklists we go through, unloading the equipment, getting the aircraft set up. Spray rate, last year we did about 1 to 3 acres an hour. Obviously, it depends on the type of terrain in the individual field, and that was at a 10 gallon per acre application rate. Most common question, how many acres can you do? It all depends on this application rate. It varies dramatically depending on what that is. That efficiency does include time for mixing and loading, as well as any backpacking that we had to do. Cleanup, it's about 30 to 45 minutes. Once we're done, we'll notify the customer, and we're off. That's where we're at now, and where are we going in the future? Our next step is we're going to introduce an autopilot. I know what you're thinking, an autopilot's used on the $200 drone you bought your kid. It's much different for agriculture. When you're 10 feet above a crop and you have a 30-degree slope, it's got to react instantaneously. So we have just finished development of that. We do plan on slowly to begin integrating that into our operations. The Phaser R. So currently we're using the R-Max. The R-Max holds 4.2 gallons. The Phaser R is more of the long-term solution. The Phaser R was introduced in Japan in 2016. We are currently working with the FAA to type certify this aircraft. Once we've achieved that, we plan on leasing it. We will only lease it to qualified applicators and operators. We do not intend to sell it. So we will continue as a service business, but primarily along the West Coast. Anything east, we plan to fulfill through our lease business. We're hoping that we can begin that in 2019, 2020. And additionally, a multi-rotor unit. So Yamaha recently introduced this. It's called the YMR-1. It was introduced in Japan in October of last year. It is under 55 pounds. For those of you that aren't aware, under 55 pounds is a big deal. Under 55 pounds, you're not an aircraft. Above 55 pounds, you're an aircraft. and the laws change dramatically, and the red tape increases significantly. It is battery powered, has a 2-gallon payload. It'll probably be another year or two before it's available here in the US. They are obviously going to fulfill the Japanese market first. There are some small changes they have to make in terms of frequencies and things of that nature. So that gives you an idea of where we've been, where we are now, and where we're moving in the future. And that's it.
Can I get the other 3 panelists here? I'm hoping you guys are all interested enough to ask some questions. You can either get up on the stage or whatever. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, question for the Yamaha rep. Can you comment on the drift relative to conventional aircraft spraying, and also from a pesticide regulatory standpoint, are you considered aerial spraying?
So we are considered aerial spraying. Part of the challenges we learned last year was, since nobody's done this, exactly what are the laws and regulations surrounding it? The thing we like to say, it will never be harder than what it is today, because we are kind of both aerial and ground, since we don't have an enclosed cockpit. In terms of drift, we don't have any definitive studies. We have worked with California DPR on that. We're continuing work with them in terms of applicator exposure to better determine what the PPR requirements need to be. I will say with the initial drift tests that were done, it was less. I don't have that data from DPR, but we did work with them. UC Davis actually conducted the test with one of our units. I don't have the data, but from what I was told from them, it was less.
Question for Rory. I think you said you were thinking about scaling up. So are you talking about, as far as weed control, are you talking about mechanical weed control on a commercial scale, or spot herbicide application, or both?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the consumer product is mechanical weed removal. So the notion is that the robot is always out there, always cutting the weeds. That's our initial thought for how we'll tackle the commercial applications, is design the robot and its power management and coverage area so that a mechanical approach can work by continuing to revisit the area every 3 or 4 days. There's certainly a world of spot herbicide application that we think is a possibility too. But I think our initial thought is we'll try to do it solely mechanically.
Hi, this is for Rory. My name is Art Galetta, farmer in New Jersey. I grow some of the finest weeds in New Jersey. And we're on the East Coast, so if you're looking for a place to try your machine, let me know.
We should connect, sir.
Okay.
Ridley Bell, Australia again. Nathan, what's eddy peel? That looks very interesting.
Yeah, it's a component of the skins of, so it's a refined out component of skins of other food products. So typically it could be a grape skin or a blueberry skin or something like that, and they'll take out just 1 or 2 molecules from that in a refining process. Then they'll granulate it and turn it into a powder so that you can apply it later. They've done work. They started out with a lot of their grant funding from the Gates Foundation. They did cassava in Africa so that they can make it last longer and not turn into cyanide, I guess, and kill people. And then they did their move to avocados right now. They think they're about 6 months away from taking on more interest in other crops. But there's definitely a thought there.
I understand that a peel, that product is considered to be organic, or is it?
They have multiple versions. They have a synthetic version, they have organic versions, and they've kind of skirted around the application rules with their organic version because they're not an application when they are a part of the berry or part of the product itself. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Two more? Okay.
No, Mike beat me to it.
Jim Lovelace, Fall Creek Nursery, Oregon. It works. This question is for Rory. With your commercial machines, mechanically harvesting, or not harvesting, but mechanically destroying weeds, is there going to be a plan for multiple drones out there, hive mind kind of mentality, to where they'll talk to each other, say, yep, we got the weeds out of this location, we're going to go over here all together?
Yeah, absolutely. They'll need to coordinate with each other. One of the reasons we did the consumer application first was that the math all works out so that the robot can be entirely solar powered, so that it'll charge itself up most of the day and then run for like an hour, and that's enough to cover a typical size garden, which meant practically we didn't need to design a charging station and find a way back to it and things like that. On a commercial level, in order to sort of get our cost per acre right, the robot needs to run much longer. So, which is a long way of saying that the robots will have a central charging station that they will go back to when they need to charge, and then charge up and then come back. And that central charging station will be sort of the coordination point for a fleet of mobile robots. So low-cost robots that are running around in one central charging station that serves as a coordination point. So there'll be a number of them working together to collaboratively cover the space. Yeah, so they'll each have an area that they're working in, but at the same time, you also need to, be careful or be thoughtful and say, like, if this robot stops working for some reason, that the other robots can then come fill in the task. But yeah, those are, the connectivity options that are available now make that a much more manageable task, much more simply than we could a couple years ago. So yeah, they'll be coordinated, most definitely. Yeah, so frankly, we're pretty early. I would hope that we can do some like really naive field trials this summer to get some robots out there and get some learning. Some longer-lasting prototypes that we could give to customers next summer, and then a year beyond that, so into 2020, I think is sort of when we might have robots that are actually available for sale. These things always take way longer than I want them to.
Question for Brad. Question for Brad. Is a longer term plan for Yamaha to take this and actually for larger scale growers be able to lease these units out for pre-programming so they can handle their own applications and programs long term?
So I'm not 100% certain on the FAA regulations. Is that on? We had to go get a 137 certificate from the FAA, which means we're a crop duster. If you're spraying your own crops, I don't believe you need to have that certificate, but I believe you will still have to meet the pilot requirements of the unit, which won't be at a commercial level, should be at a sport, which is the lowest level. So yes, that is our intention, to lease to existing crop dusters and to large scale farmers.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. That was fantastic.